We are still at the 5 aggregates of cleaning. Sanya, perception. He reflects. Tas is perception. Tas is the arising of perception. Tas, the passing away of perception. Iti sanya nya samudhayo, arising. Iti sanya nya athankamo, passing away. It's quite simple here in the book. Rising and passing away of perception. But then what is this perception, this perceiving? Sometimes it is explained as memories. Memories is sanya. But according to the Abhidhamma, perception, characteristic of perception is perceiving the quality of the objects. Perceiving the quality of the objects. What is that object? So it is characteristics. Function as marking an object. For perceiving again, putting a mark. Putting a mark. It is like a jungle hike. When you go into a jungle, they make a mark. They put tie a ribbon or tie a string on certain branches. Then they can find their way back to the outside world. So, sanya, perception, the function of perception is marking an object so that you can remember. Like you go to a new place and there are certain fruits or food, and then you perceive, oh, it is the color, the texture, perhaps you taste it, and then it stays in your mind in the form of perception or memories that I have eaten that fruit before, I've tasted that fruits before. So that is the function of perception. Manifest as recognizing what has previously been perceived. So what is the manifestation of how does it appear? It appears actually as remembering what you have seen or heard or smell or taste or touch. What is the cause? The proximate cause is appearing as an object of the 6 senses. Appearing of the object for the 6 senses. It is quite deep. If we go directly to the Abhidhamma Sankhaha, now to make it more simple, this perception arises in every thought. There is this perception, so it arises all the time. Now, if we haven't seen that thing before, then we make a marking on it. Like you meet a new friends, then you introduce yourself and they introduce to you, and then you make a marking by means of how tall he is or she is, how she look like, what color, what she dress, how she talk, how she walk. Now these are all sanya, these are all perceiving. You start making a lot of marking, so that the next time you meet that person, you recognize that person. Say, oh, this is so and so. I have seen him before, or I have seen her before. So that is perception, that is perceiving. Now, what role does it play in the mind? What is the role? So, the role that it plays in the mind. Now, by way of, let's say, cleaning to the perception of the past, present, or future. Now, we perceive our past, that we are young, well, we stay in certain places, or when we are young, we are rich, or we are carefree, or we are very happy, or when we are young, we have have a lot of enjoyment, right? So that is past perception. When you have nothing to do, when you are alone, then the mind goes back, perceiving the past. So for no reason sometimes when I meditate and I see myself when I was in the secondary school, and behind the school we have a lake, some sort of a stream, and we are quite cheeky actually. After school a group of us will go there and start swimming, and there are trees there, and we swing like a Tarzan, and then we dive into the stream, and we get ourselves cut because there are a lot of broken glasses around there underneath. And for no reason, when you're rising, falling, you start to go to the past and you perceive, and then you smile. Okay, that's very funny. That's enjoyable. That's very funny. They say that's a carefree life. When you have no worries, when you just enjoy yourself. Sometimes things that are not so good. Then we have fights, we have quarrels, we have a lot of things going. And when you think about that of the past, sometimes it puts a smile on your lips. That is perceiving. You perceive the good things in the past, or you perceive the bad things in the past. And when it arises in your mind, when you cling to that perception, then it brings happiness or pain. Now if you perceive pleasant things, happy things, then you feel happy. But if you were to perceive in the past those things that cause pain, those things that cause a lot of unhappiness, then you feel very sad. Now, therefore, this perception plays a great part in our thinking process, in our thoughts formation. So, if you do not develop mindfulness on this perception, if you do not separate it out, which the Buddha separated it out because it is an important part of our psychic, important part of our mind, that if you don't take note of them, then we are dragged down into sadness, in suffering, when we cling to a lot of all those unpleasant perception of the past. So these are past perception that we cling to. And we say that why should we cling to bad thoughts, unpleasant thoughts? Now we could cling to pleasant thoughts. We could cling to perceiving that is pleasant, like when you are rich or when you are young, when you are beautiful that time or handsome that time, have a lot of friends. Then you say we could cling to them because they give us a lot of joy. But then on the other hand, why should you cling to perceiving that are unpleasant? Why? Why? But then again, we could cling to unpleasant in the sense that once it is pleasant, now you are missing that thing's pleasant, or somebody dear, or something dear and precious thing that you have lost. And then when you think about that, when you lost it, then it's something unpleasant, but you still cling to it. Cling to that perception. And so it develops remorse in your mind. Now what about clinging to the pleasant? Now the pleasant is when you compare the perceiving of the past. Once I'm rich, now I'm not so rich. So that is in comparison. Now if you think like that, then you feel very sad. But if you will think that once in the past I was very poor, but now I'm okay, then you feel all right. Then you feel a sense of satisfaction in the present with that perceiving that I'm okay. Or you perceive that in the present now I have the Dhamma. Previously I don't have the Dhamma. Previously I do not understand the Dhamma. But now I have the Dhamma. Now I practice the Dhamma. Now if you perceive that you have gained, then probably it brings contentment and even joy by present perceiving, that you perceive in the present moment. So it's a matter of comparison. When you perceive now and you compare to what you perceive in the past. So if you perceive that, well, once you're happy, now you're not so happy, you perceive. So what about the present perceiving without comparing is you perceive right now by marking with your senses, okay? You're present. But you do associate with a certain concept. When you see somebody, you see a stranger, for example, somebody has snatched your purse in the past, a month ago or 2 or 3, and when you see somebody walking towards you, then you perceive that this person, who is a stranger, because he's a stranger, he may snatch your purse. But if he's a friend, then you would not have such a linking perception. If it is a stranger, then you perceive that a stranger might snatch your purse, right? Unless he wears nicely, he put on a tie, perhaps you see him coming out of a car, a big car, then you would not have that fear. Then you would not have that present perception that he's going to snatch your purse. So fear would not arise. Now this perception play a great part in our mind, that we must learn to understand these aggregates of perception, how it works. Now perception of the future. Now if you were to think that something pleasant, if you think of the future like, well, soon I will retire, and then with my savings I will go around the world, or I will visit my relative in other country. Now if you have such type of perceiving, but that is still the future, it is not happening yet. But once you have such type of perceiving, sanya, then you feel very happy. Then you are waiting for the day that you retire so that you could visit your family members who is overseas, or your loved one who is overseas. Now, again, this perceiving plays a great part, bringing out your joy, your happiness, or your sadness. Now, if you perceive that, well, now my children is all grown up, soon they will go out and earn their own living, and they will no longer dependent on me, then I'll be free. Then I would not have to work so hard. I would not have to have so heavy burden. Now, if you have such type of perceiving, when you look at your children and you have this type of perceiving, then you feel happy. You feel a sense of likeness. You feel, okay, that's great. Now they've grown up. Very soon you will not have that burden anymore. Now, what if you perceive something unpleasant? What if you perceive, instead of, well, I retired and then I would travel around the world, but if you perceive that when I retired, I don't have enough savings, now what's going to happen to me? Then a lot of fear will arise in your mind, a lot of agitation, and a lot of instability of mind. When you start thinking of the future, when you perceive your future as something that is very bleak. So if you cling to such type of perceiving, then it brings great pain to the mind. So what should you do? You should understand the aggregates, the Buddha says, they are mere perceiving. There is nothing more than that. They just arises playing a function, and then they disappear. They arises and they fall away. They arises and they fall away. They arises playing a function, a part of the aggregates, and then they fall away. There is no self in perception. Perception is not self. It is just perceiving, that is all. Now, if you practice mindfulness, aware, then comes the detachment. Detachment to the perception, and the mind remains peaceful, being calm and peaceful. Therefore, the practice of the 5 aggregates is important in our mindfulness. Now, if you were to think of the future that is unpleasant, what if I grow old? What if I have a lot of sicknesses and pain? What if my children is far away and they can't look after me? What if I lost my memory? Dementia becomes like children again. You can't remember things. You forget things. What if I die lonely by myself? What if? Now, if you have such type of perceiving, then it brings great fear. Then brings great pain to the mind. So you must note them as an aggregate. Just note them as sanya, sanya, sanya. Just perception. They arises and they pass away. Once you cling to them, then the continuation of that pain with that unpleasant objects. So do not cling to the perception. If you cling to them, then the pain continues on. As long as you cling on to unpleasant perception, the pain will carry on and become stronger and stronger and stronger. And your pain become more deeper and deeper. So when you practice Satipatthana, mindfulness, this comes under Dhamma, realities. These are real, nature of the mind, nature of how perception works, how aggregate comes together, how perceiving works. Now, if you cling to them, then produce pain. But if you detach from them, then they pass away. They constantly arise and pass away, arise and pass away. You cannot destroy perception. You can't say, okay, I do not want to perceive. I will cut off my perceiving. No, it has its own force. Once you develop that force, that perception, it will expand itself. If you keep noting it, then it becomes weaker and weaker and it dies away. But if you keep expanding it, then it becomes very strong and the perception keep coming again and again and again. Morning, afternoon, evening, it won't leave you alone. Just keep appearing in your mind. So, the Buddha says you should not cling to perception. If you cling to perception, it brings a lot of pain, suffering. You remember when we talk about suffering, Buddha says that the 5 aggregates of clinging is suffering. When you combine what actually is suffering, it is the clinging to the 5 aggregate that is suffering. Now then, when you talk about this perception, then what can we do about perception? So we can't control perception. It just arises by itself. Then what can we do with perception? How can we manage perception? We can't. How? We can't. By perceiving with wholesomeness. We learn to perceive with metta. We learn to perceive with compassion. We learn to perceive with wisdom. We learn to perceive with letting go, detachment. Now how do you do that? Now when you perceive something that is unpleasant, then you perceive with metta. It is all right. Well, never mind. Probably I have hurt him in the past. Now he's hurting me back. May he be well and happy. May he be peaceful. May he be well, happy. Now you perceive that objects with metta. Then the mind becomes wholesome, becomes pleasant, becomes samadhi, becomes stable and peaceful. So you need to add in metta to your perception. If you don't, if you cling on to the perception, even though if it appears as pleasant, it gives you a lot of joy, but it passes away. And when it passes away, you try to cling to it. You do not want it to pass away, something that is pleasant. Then you suffer because it is no more. You cling to something so pleasant, but it is no more. So perception arises. You add something into it. You add metta into it. You add compassion into it. You add wisdom into it. You analyze, wise reflection. You analyze. Is this correct? Is this not correct? Perceiving is just what you perceive as correct. Other people perceive as not correct, as wrong. Because perceiving is individual. As the saying goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The person who perceives, he thinks that you are beautiful, means you are beautiful. But others may not see you as beautiful. Others may criticize. Others may say that you are too fat, you are too thin, you are too tall, you are too short. But the beholder, the one that sees it as a beauty, to him is beauty. Therefore, when we perceive something right, it could be wrong. Just as if we perceive something wrong, it could be right. Perceiving. Now, I give you an example of this lady who is very angry. She's very angry and very frustrated. And she complained that, Brother James, I got this new helper, house helper, and she's really terrible. Huh? I've told her 1,000 times, this cloth is for cleaning the table. That cloth is for drying the clean plate. And that cloth is used for dirty things, not the table. This is for the floor. If the floor is wet, dirty, you could just take this cloth and I hang it there properly. But she messed up. She used the drying cloth and then she started cleaning the table, start cleaning the floor. And then she used the floor one to clean the dry plates. Can die or not, you see? Huh? Sure die, heart attack. So you say, must sack her, otherwise I will have short life. Short life, cannot stand. But to the helper, she sees that cloth is so clean, more clean than her face towel. So she thinks that this must be the right one for the plate. So it's a different perception. She sees it as, wow, this is so clean, so can clean the plate. But this is clean, but it's supposed to be for the floor. So perception. So a lot of time people quarrel. People can't understand each other because we have different perception. Because we perceive differently. We do not perceive the same thing. We perceive differently. According to the age, according to the condition. Young people perceive different from people who are elderly. Even so, a female perceives differently from a male. They cannot see the same thing. They see differently. So that is where sometimes a lot of misunderstanding arises, a lot of quarrels arises, because of perception. So you need to note perception as perception. It is not your perception, it is just a perception, because other people may see it differently. Right. So seeing it with wisdom, if you can perceive things with wisdom, then there is less conflict in the mind, then the mind is more peaceful and less disturbed. There are perceptions that arises with wrong views. So that is important, part of perceiving. Now when you talk about perceiving, it is so close to thinking. It plays a great part in our formation of the mind. Because of such way of perceiving, we think in that way. Now if we perceive differently, then we would think differently. So perceiving the sanya, cetasikas, mental states of that perceiving plays a very great part in our thinking process or mental formation, sankhara. If we perceive wrongly, it arises with wrong views. Then it produces a lot of bad karma. So we will do a lot of bad things, a lot of unwholesome things because of the wrong view, because we perceive it wrongly. So therefore, the formation of the mind arises with wrong view. Now we perceive things as permanent. For example, we see things as permanent. We see things as, we never think of dying. We always think that we will live forever. Even you are 80, you still think you are young. Until you look at the mirror yourself. Then you see yourself not so young anymore. Now, it is just a perception. It's just a perceiving. It's just a perceiving. Like if you see somebody who is 60 years old, and you say, he looks old, but you don't know that you look older. You think that you are young. The fact is you are older than the person, but you still think yourself young. You still think yourself that you live forever. Now, it is the perception of permanence that we think that this thing is mine. It will belongs to me. It is mine. But when it is stolen, then we cry and cry and cry because we think it is mine, permanent. Now we think that we live forever, we are always healthy, but when we get sick, we can't accept that we are sick because we think that we are never going to be sick. Then you say, why me? Why must I be sick? I never do anything so evil. Why must I be sick? Because you think you'll always be healthy. Now in that way, our perception, we perceive that we should not be sick. We perceive that we should always be healthy. Now in that way, we cling, by clinging to such type of perception, we encounter great pain. Then we suffer mentally because we can't accept. Because our perceiving is different. We can't let go. We perceive ourselves to be always healthy. To be always healthy, not sick. We perceive ourselves to be permanent. Right? Permanent means that if you are rich, you always think yourself as rich. If you are poor, you can't accept that because once you are rich. Now, that is the perception arises with wrong view. Seeing the impermanent as permanent. Seeing suffering as happiness. We see things as happiness. That's why we cling to this life. We cling to the future life. Because we see life as happiness. We see it, the things that we see. We see that if I have that, I'll be very, very happy. But once you have it, then you think that I'm not so happy. I want another thing. So, there's this story, an interesting one, about two good friends. And one friend was very religious, doing a lot of dana, meditation, doing a lot of good work. But the other friend is a rascal. He likes to gamble, he likes to drink, He doesn't want to do anything wholesome. He just fool around. And so they die of old age. And one was born as the Jade Emperor, the king of the Devas in the second realm. And the other was born as a maggot, where in the olden times they have bucket and you shit there inside the bucket, and then at the end of the day or in the morning, then somebody go and take it away as fertilizer. So in China they still have that in the countryside, and it is very valuable. You have to pay for the money. You have to pay for it. They say, one bucket how much? Why? Why do they buy that? For vegetable. As fertilizer. They use that as fertilizer. I heard that they do that still in China, in the countryside, because it's cheaper than fertilizer. And so, and he looked down looking for his good friends. Where is he? And he found that he was born as a maggot in the tub. So he appeared in front of his good friends. And with his psychic powers, he talked to his friends. Say, do you remember? Do you remember? You are so-and-so. I'm so-and-so. We are very good friends in the previous life. Do you remember? And this maggot was thinking, because of the psychic powers of this Deva, king of Devas. He could remember. And he say, oh yeah, we are very, very good friends. Now I remember, we are very good friends. Then he say, where are you? He say, now I am in the second level. I am the king of Devas. He say, oh, you are king of Devas. And what do you do there? He say, oh, I have a lot of work to do. I look after my subject. Sometimes they quarrel. I become the judge. Then I will say who is right and who is wrong. And I have a lot of job to do. And I got many wives. I have to look after my wives and my property. And then this maggot was looking at him. He said, oh, you got so much to do. But I have nothing to do. And the heaven dropped down food for me to eat. So he said, my life is better than yours. But the fact is, he's going to die. He only got a short life. And very soon, these people will come and take him away and he become fertilizer. But he think he got a happy life. He think, my life is so good. I don't have to do anything. And heaven dropped down food. Well, he's a king and there's so much thing to do. Now, fantastic. Now, this is sanya, perception. To the worms, to this maggot, he thinks that he has a good life. He don't have to work. And he got a lot of food in the tub. Got a lot of food to eat. Now, that is perception. But of course, that is wrong view, wrong perception. Taking the suffering as happiness. Now, a lot of time too, we are like that maggot. Even though we are not born as a maggot, many a times too, we are like that maggot. We take a lot of things that are suffering as happiness. Don't you think so? You think about that tonight. So, perception associate with right view. So, their perception with right view, what you're doing, meditating, their right view, rising, falling, you're practicing the four foundations of mindfulness. Now these are perception, you perceive, and perception that arises with the right view. And so that is important. So for tonight's talk, you must learn to understand what perception is, and you have to take it as merely one of the five aggregates. Especially when you meditate and you start seeing things, you start feeling somebody outside, unseen beings. So you tell yourself that it's merely perception, right? There should be no fear. There's no ego in the perception. There's no self in the perception. It is merely perceiving. Tell yourself, aware, knowing, perceiving. And don't get attached to it. Don't start seeing things. Don't long for seeing things, right? Don't attach to perception. Then it brings a lot of pain, divert you to the wrong path. Okay?